Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. It seems the more you think you know, the more there's something much more sinister lurking beneath the surface. So, if you want to find out what sleeps under your bed at night, settle in for a little story that I like to call You Never Know.
When I was a child, I had a very special friend, which was really good for me because before him, I had a really bad childhood. See, my mother died when I was very little, about the time I started making memories. I was 4. Father, I don't think, ever got over her death. It ate at him, ate at his soul like a foul-smelling cancer. If our inner selves are a stream of flowing energy, my father's turned stagnant and reeking the day my mother passed away. The papers said she killed herself, and Dad always claimed the same, but even back then, it didn't make any sense. Mom was such a happy person, vibrant and always ready to meet life head-on. Even at that age, I knew something just wasn't right. Of course, I would grow to learn the truth, but these are more things I've just come to understand now that I'm older. Some things you should never just have to understand as a child. Now, let me make this clear. I was never physically abused. Never once did my father strike me in anger, though a few times I honestly thought that he might. But he never did. He never really grounded me either. He'd yell. He'd yell a lot. And other times, when he wasn't yelling, I barely saw my father, or at least heard him. Dad became an alcoholic. And I'm not talking about the closet type, coming home from work and throwing back a glass of wine every day. The FDA's classification of what an alcoholic is or whatever. No, my dad became a fall-down drunk. Mostly, he listened to country music really loud, until he got so drunk that he could no longer stand or dance around like, well, a total jackass. Then he'd turn the music off, look at pictures of Mom, cry a lot, and eventually come yell at me for whatever his heart desired. And he'd do that until bed. I guess you could say it was a form of verbal and psychological abuse, but I never really looked at it that way. But he did. It was a day not like any other when I was little. It was early fall and I had just started 2nd grade. I remember the day well. That morning, Dad seemed to be a little less dad-like, which was nice. All my friends from the 1st grade were all in the same class again, and when I got home from school, it was really nice outside. Dad was working part-time, and I still to this day have no idea where he got the money for the alcohol from. But Dad was so lit, I don't even think he noticed me coming home. So I simply went out back to play. I didn't have a swing set, or a fort, or slides, or anything like that when I was little. I had the yard, which was so overgrown, it became a sea of long, thin grass reeds that completely overtook my small frame with their tall reach, but also the woods nearby. Needless to say, ticks and such were a normalcy for me, and less bothersome than my actual life inside the house, really, and wandering deep within the grass to get to the forest's edge was nothing but the simplest and most mundane of tasks for me to undertake. In fact, by this time of year, a path made by my own 2 feet had always taken hold, growing in the following spring for me to trample down once again. And that day, after school, I heard it. It was a soft whistling, coming from the trees that I had been walking towards. Curious and not an ounce of fear within me, I walked ever closer to them. And that is where I met him. I don't know if it was the overcast and cloudy sky, the time of day, or the way the canopy blocked off the light from above, but maybe it was a combination of all three. The gloom and shadow of the forest made it difficult to see him. He was tall, and although he seemed to kind of whisper, I could tell his voice was deep. Plus, I didn't get too close to him, but after asking him his name, telling him mine, and talking for a while, I suppose I began to look at this being as a friend. He stood in the gray of the light that pervaded despite the forces working against it, making his form nearly black with the silhouette it created. It was like he was made of shadow. But eventually, my rumbling stomach got my attention, and I had spent far too long telling this being all about my life. I was hungry, and it was time for dinner, which usually meant foraging for my own food while Dad lay passed out on the couch. I said goodbye to my friend and thanked him for being so nice. What I didn't know is that I'd be seeing him again very soon. I really don't remember what I made for dinner for myself that night, if I even conversed with my father at all, or even what time I put myself to bed. But what I do remember was waking up. At first, my struggling eyes were met with nothing but the near blackness of my room. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred in the shadows just out of sight, and the silence was nearly deafening. I assumed that I must have woken up to absolutely nothing at all, and rested my head back into my pillow to go back to sleep. But just as soon as I laid back, I heard it. It was a voice whispering my name. My first reaction was one of panic and terror, knowing that something was in my room, hiding in the dark, but in that same moment, I felt myself ease a bit, because I recognized the voice. It was my friend from the forest. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. The tall shape stepped from the shadows near to my bed, yet still concealed by them. He placed something on my blanket and told me that he wanted to see where I lived. I'll never forget that first gift. It was small, rigid, and although he never searched my room anyway, it was easy to hide, which was a good thing, because even I knew that I shouldn't have it. It was a small hand axe. A hatchet. Yeah, even back then I thought this was an odd gift, but I took it happily from him anyway. He stood beside my bed, and we whispered back and forth into the night, until I eventually fell back asleep. In the morning, I opened my eyes, my room bathed in light, wondering if he was still there. My room was empty, but I never actually saw him leave. However, my eyes told me the truth. He was gone, and not only that, it was time for school. However, the gift that he gave me was still there, under my covers. I made sure to hide it under my mattress, smiling, not from the gift, but due to what it represented. He was real, and I didn't dream the whole thing. I had finally made a friend. Over the course of the next few weeks, he came to visit me nearly every single night. I learned that his name was Stuart, and he assured me that he wasn't there to harm me. He brought me things every single night that he came as well, like snacks and toys, but never anything so odd as a hand axe again. But I cherished everything that he gave me, and every time he visited me. He told me that I couldn't tell anyone about him or he wouldn't be allowed to be friends with me anymore. But I didn't have anyone to really tell anyway. No one would believe me that I knew of. Even at that age, I knew that much at least. So, I agreed, and for a while we were good friends, until that last night that he came to visit. On the last night, I really opened up to Stuart, and I told him how much I missed my mother, and even my dad. I told him all about Dad's drinking and bouts of yelling at me, and all about the meals that I had made for myself over the time that I could remember. Stuart didn't really say anything, and I couldn't see his face to read his expression, but I knew there was something different about him after this conversation. His demeanor changed, became more quiet and reserved. But again, he wasn't mean, he didn't yell, and he truly cared about me. At least I thought he did. And eventually, like every other night, I simply fell asleep. The next morning, I knew that something was wrong. I could smell it in the air, and even though when I saw it, the state of our living room and our kitchen, I still couldn't quite understand. I knew even back then that blood was bad and that something awful had happened. The blood was everywhere, on every surface and splattered on every wall. I yelled for Dad, but he was nowhere to be found, and eventually I ran to the neighbor's house. After that, that's when I went to go live with my grandparents, and for a while, I simply didn't understand. All I knew is that Dad was gone, and that I never saw Stuart again. Well, it's been years since then, and as I grew older, I learned the truth behind it all. Stuart wasn't a ghost. He wasn't hiding in my closet, and there was nothing supernatural about him at all. Stuart Gibson was a mentally ill human being. Human, like you and me. When he started coming to visit me, he didn't know much of anything about me at all. He was just watching me from those woods, and apparently waiting until nightfall to make his move and sneak into my home. But as time progressed, I suppose my lack of fear of him led to this creepo befriending me and bringing me gifts nightly just to sneak in and talk with me, to indulge some weird fantasy of his. And when I told him about my father, he killed him. After I fell back to sleep, Stuart killed my father, slitting his throat in his sleep, and hacking his body up into pieces and spreading them across the house. In court, I guess he said that this way, my dad could spend more time with me or something, being present everywhere, or something like that. Sick fuck. But the reason he was there in the first place wasn't for my dad. And I'm glad I decided to befriend him instead of screaming or calling for my father, because I still have that first gift that he gave me. I keep it next to my bed on the nightstand, and every time I see it, it reminds me of how close to death I truly came. So, always check under your children's beds. Always search their closets, and never take what they say for granted. Because monsters do exist, and you never know if you have a Stuart Gibson in your house.
Well, the more evil dances in, out, and around your life, the more it will eventually reveal itself. But by then, it may be too late. But it's never too late for you to tune back in for more terror. Just stop by again next weekend. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.